Years back, shortly after I started watching YouTube religiously, I was watching gaming discussion channels who helped introduce me to some of my favorite pieces of media. And among them was the occasional hilarious meme. And the best of those memes was this. Little did I know what I had just bore witness to. Thanks, QG. Shortly after I started thinking of getting into anime, I saw these videos pop into my recommendations. They were about a series called JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I was a bit weirded out. I didn't understand this character's hairdo, or this scene of something sticking out of his mouth, and the name JoJo's Bizarre Adventure struck me as too weird and something I wouldn't be interested in. It wasn't until later, after I watched more videos that explained some of the series' lore and characters, that I became interested enough to give the series a shot. It started as what I felt was a boring show with a boring main character that I had to force myself to keep watching, and I stopped around episode 7. But I kept seeing videos of people gushing about the later parts of the story, so I decided to give JoJo another shot. What followed was the story going from boring to enjoyable, but still feeling outdated, to a very engaging all-time favorite series of mine, to straight up making me cry when I finished part 6. It also goes from straight as an arrow to one of the most gay-coded things I've ever seen, and eventually one of the most explicitly queer anime there is. And in the manga, it even gets genderqueer. Quite the paradigm shift, going from off-put by the series' bizarre vibes, to it being one of the few pieces of media to successfully make me cry, becoming one of my favorite anime or manga. This series has some of my favorite characters, one of my favorite power systems, and even some of my favorite art in the entire medium. Since watching it, I've also seen some people who are off-put by the series' bizarre vibes, and I wonder how many of these people might have otherwise enjoyed the series if they just gave it a chance. So I decided to make this video, explaining my experience with all 6 parts prior to the reboot, and in honor of the recently released Part 7, or at least the first arc of it. Damn it, Netflix! I hope I can convey why I, and so many other fans, love this series about muscly people fighting each other with psychic punching ghosts named after 70s and 80s music so much. But if you think you may not like the early parts like myself, I'll recommend a different watching order at the end of the video. Yes, you can watch or read the parts out of order, just make sure you get to all of them eventually. So, my dear viewers, let's begin with Part 1. Phantom Blood. And keep in mind, there will be minor spoilers. I'll give enough detail to explain the setup and early arcs so you get a sense of the story and the main cast of each part without giving away too much. The series begins in seemingly mundane fashion. In the anime, the manga begins with a strange sacrificial ritual involving a mysterious stone mask before cutting to the same starting scene as the anime. A thief named Dario Brando comes across a crippled George Joestar in what he thought was a stagecoach accident. Fast forward to 1880 and George's son, Jonathan Joestar, aka JoJo, is happily living in the Joestar family mansion. He's got a good heart, striving to become a true gentleman, though he's a bit down on his luck when it comes to standing up to bullies. Then Dario's son arrives, that of course being Dio Brando. Dio is one of the most iconic villains in all of anime. He's incredibly cruel and delights in causing misery to his victims. And he goes out of his way to ruin Jonathan's life as much as possible, going so far as to turn people against him, beating the snot out of him, and of course, stealing the first kiss of Jonathan's love. And look at that, here's the first of many memes. You'll notice as you get further into this series that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is the single most memeable thing maybe ever. And I'll be going over more of them as I go. That last one finally pisses Jonathan off enough to give Dio a good fist to the face. This gets Dio to back off. Seemingly. For the time being at least. But then it's revealed that he killed Jonathan's dog. 7 years pass, Jonathan is now super ripped, and Jonathan and Dio look like they are getting along. But then George starts getting sick, and a bit of detective work from Jonathan reveals that he's getting the same symptoms as Dario did when he died. Meaning Dio is poisoning George just like he did with his own father. And he's planning on killing Jonathan as well, all for the purpose of gaining the massive Joestar fortune. Jonathan looks for a cure while Dio tests a weapon he hopes to use to kill Jonathan, that mysterious stone mask. But it doesn't kill the victim, it turns him into a vampire. Given how much of a menace Dio is already, take a wild guess what he does with the mask the first chance he gets. Yep, he uses it on himself to become a vampire. Oh, and Jonathan made a new friend named Robert E.O. Speedwagon. Yeah, this series has a lot of references to 70s and 80s music, but most of them need to be changed in the English translation to avoid copyright trouble. See how many you recognize! Now a vampire, Dio has the ability to fist bodies to drink blood through the holes, super strength, and a ridiculous healing factor. But thanks to his bravery and tenacity, Jonathan manages to trap Dio in the burning mansion. But even that doesn't manage to kill him. A man named Baron Will Antonio Zeppeli comes to Jonathan to reveal this to him and teach him the martial art Hamon, which channels the sun's energy via breathing through the blood to the limbs of the user. And the sun's energy is the only thing that can permanently kill a vampire, which is important because Dio now has several more vampire powers he's discovered in the time since then, including flash freezing, zombification, and making whatever the heck these things are. And Jonathan and his new mentor must fight against them. That's enough information to explain the general plot of Phantom Blood, so now let's take a closer look at the main characters. And now we've come to the reason why I didn't like JoJo at first. The series, not the character, though in this case it's kind of both. Jonathan Joestar is very uninteresting as a protagonist and as a character in general. He's selfless and he fights the big bad guys, but that's kind of it. Even Araki admitted that he was a little on the boring side. The best thing about him is seeing him respond to the tragedy that he suffers, forcing him out of his relatively easy life and putting his noble intentions to the test, which kind of works with the following fights against Dio's minions. But even that only gets you so far. The other characters aren't worth writing home about either. Baron Zeppeli is just there being a mentor except when he isn't. Speedwagon is fun and offers good commentary. Irene is barely in the story and is just the love interest, at least right now. There are other characters, but they don't matter until the next part outside of memes, that is. My read on the powers is a bit better. Hamon can transfer between objects and even living things, sticking them together or even putting life into plants, though that doesn't come up very often. Fortunately, there are some clever uses of it, with Jonathan figuring out the different ways he can use Hamon to defend himself or channel it through a medium. Dio is also a tricky foe because his ability to flash freeze anything, including all of the blood in human limbs, can shut off Jonathan's Hamon before it can reach him, thus forcing Jonathan to think of a way to counter the flash freeze in order to win. This is one of the biggest strengths of JoJo. The outcome of a fight is never determined by a contest of power, though the best uses of it are yet to come. I won't spoil too much about the conclusion in the final fight with Dio, but it ends in rather tragic fashion, though it does leave the door open for a sequel. As for my final thoughts on this part, I am still not the biggest fan of it, but as time has gone on, and I've managed to rewatch it, I've gained a new appreciation for Phantom Blood, not just as a story, but as a part of a greater story. It establishes the Joestar bloodline and their struggle against supernatural evil very well, along with the puzzle-like fights the series is known for. I may not have enjoyed it all that much, but I admit it is a good foundation for the series as a whole. Moving on to part 2, Battle Tendency, this is where the series' multiple parts start to come into play. New protagonist, mostly new side characters, and new villains to fight. It's kind of like what The Legend of Korra is to Avatar: The Last Airbender. Definitely the same world, but most of the characters from the previous part are dead, and the ones that are still alive are old. Irene is now a sassy granny, and Speedwagon is an old feller, but is still great at adding enjoyable commentary. And we have a new protagonist, Joseph Joestar, and I like him a lot more than his granddad. Jonathan was boring and uncompelling since he was just good, and the only thing that made him unique was how he responded to the immense tragedy he suffered. Joseph, on the other hand, is fun. Jonathan strived to be the perfect gentleman, but Joseph doesn't give a damn. He'll use every trick imaginable, and several more that are unimaginable, and some that seem downright impossible. Most notable is his ability to read ahead in the script.
Next you'll say, "You bastard, how could you have possibly known where they were? You bastard, how could you possibly have known where they were?"
Araki massively improved as a storyteller from part 1 to part 2. He hadn't quite reached the level he would later, but I was never in danger of giving up during my initial watch-through of Battle Tendency. Hamon is also back, but it's a lot more interesting here than it was in Phantom Blood. There's a lot less of just channeling it directly towards vampires and zombies to kill them, and a lot more of channeling it into objects for various effects. like channeling it into bubbles to make them stronger, channeling it into oil to either cling to or repel, channeling it into thread to make a monster-killing net, etc. It also gets a lot more unique from person to person as each user develops completely different techniques. Now it's way less about brute force or finding one counter to the opponent's defense, and a lot more about trickery and creativity. This was kind of present in the fight against Dio, where Jonathan had to figure out a way around the vampiric flash freeze, but that's one example. And Joseph is going to need every advantage he can get in order to stand up to the new antagonists for this part. Speaking of which, Araki at this point in time was still trying to escalate the villains in terms of power. So what's more powerful than a vampire? The answer Araki came to was a Pillar Man. Beings capable of appearing like rock, phasing through objects, absurd strength, and regeneration. They can devour a vampire with little trouble, and take a lot more than one good blast of Hamon in order to beat. Fortunately, Joseph and friends have a new ally to help them fight against the Pillar Men. Caesar Zeppeli, grandson of Baron Zeppeli from Phantom Blood. And continuing the trend of improving upon everything from Part 1, Caesar is a much better character than his granddad. He's dedicated his life to Hamon, and to him, Joseph's trickster style and lack of training is an insult to the art of Hamon. As such, he's antagonistic towards the new JoJo, initially. But once the Pillar Men prove too much for either of them to handle, they have to leave for a training arc, under a mysterious woman named Lisa who appears to be incredibly powerful. She puts them through a brutal training exercise, and once it's over, Joseph and Caesar are much stronger. They've developed new Hamon techniques, and they've gained a bit of respect for one another. In fact, they're friends now. And from there, the story continues onward after revealing the Pillar Men's plan. They are the original creators of the stone masks, and turning humans into vampires is just a side effect of their true purpose: to break the limitations of their bodies, allowing them to transform into the ultimate life form. For that, they also want a special gem called the Red Stone of Asia, which is in Lisa's possession, for now at least. That's as much as I can say without getting into spoilers. But I'll leave you with this. I knew a fair bit about JoJo when I started watching the anime, and I kind of thought of the Hamon era as something I had to get through to get to the better power system and more interesting characters, and to an extent that was the case. I did end up enjoying the later parts more, but the Hamon era did manage to surprise me, and it even left me with several moments from the climax that impacted me far more than I anticipated, especially considering that I already knew most of the main plot. I realized later on that even back then there was a method to the madness. Despite how weird JoJo can be, Araki had themes he wanted to explore, and if you're willing to take the story seriously, you'll see that Araki's authorial intent has been strong from the beginning. Overall, battle tendency was a huge step up from Phantom Blood, and it even has a few strengths that let it stand out, even 7 parts later. I was very excited to begin Part 3, Stardust Crusaders, during my initial watch-through. I knew about stands, which I expected to like a lot, I knew a bit about the protagonist, who I expected to become a favorite for me, and I had a basic understanding of the story structure of the part. For the most part, I was right. I did enjoy Stardust Crusaders more than Phantom Blood, but there were also some things I enjoyed that I didn't expect to, and some problems that were bigger than I anticipated. I will get to all of that in a bit, but overall, Part 3 was another step up. Hirohiko Araki is one of the best authors I can think of in any medium when it comes to evolving as an artist. He's honestly on the same level as Rick Riordan in that regard, and coming from me, that's high praise. Starting things off, since the end of Battle Tendency, Joseph had a daughter named Holly who is married a Japanese man, and had a son named Jotaro Kujo, the most popular character in the series. Jotaro has recently gotten into some trouble and was sent to jail for a minute, and is now getting released. His mom runs to pick him up, reminiscing on all of the wholesome memories she's had with him. Then she gets to him and he calls her an annoying bitch. Not the best introduction to your new protagonist, but Jotaro refuses to leave the cell because he claims he's possessed by an evil spirit, which sounds ridiculous until Holly sees a third arm appear from Jotaro's side, take one of the officer's guns, which he uses to shoot himself, only for the bullet to be stopped in mid-air by the arm again. So Holly goes out to get some help from her father, who is a mysterious fortune teller from Egypt named Avdol by his side, who reveals that Jotaro's quote-unquote evil spirit is actually a manifestation of his soul, known as a stand. You see, Dio didn't die at the end of Phantom Blood, and he successfully attached his head to Jonathan's body, and he somehow gained a stand. And because of how bloodlines work in this universe, every Joestar descendant also has a stand now. Now that Dio is rising in power again, it's the descendants of the Joestar bloodline that must now go stop him. But Jotaro has no interest in his family's feud with a psychotic vampire at first. Then one of Dio's assassins shows up at his school and tries to kill him. Jotaro defeats him and brings him home, and he shows some concern for his mother's well-being, showing that he's got a heart of gold beneath all the stoicism. After freeing the assassin from Dio's vampire mind-controlling flesh bud, which is something he can make apparently, Holly falls ill. Apparently she's got a stand too, but she lacks the mental fortitude to control it, so now it's killing her. And the only way to save her is to kill the very thing that is forcing the stand to manifest. Dio. So the heroes have 50 days to cross the world and kill the vampire or Holly dies. And that is how Stardust Crusaders starts off. Getting into this part proper, stands almost completely replaced Hamon. Joseph still uses Hamon since he's already trained in it and they're going to fight a vampire, but aside from that, it's all stands. And honestly, Araki was already heading in that direction. Remember the creative fighting techniques I talked about before, giving each character their own unique fighting style? Well, that's what eventually led to every character getting their own unique powers in this part. And each stand really is completely different from the next, for the most part. Foreshadowing is a literary device in which Jotaro's Star Platinum punches really fast and really hard. Joseph's Hermit Purple can help Joseph see things from a distance in addition to being usable as whips that can channel his Hamon. Abdal's Magician's Red can make fire and heat things up. And recently saved from mind control, Kakuin's Hierophant Green can unravel itself into tendrils and possess people, as well as fire emeralds that can't simply be deflected, but get deflected a ton of times. Each one is wholly unique, and they only get more creative and more, bizarre. Some so much so that a few stands make you wonder what Araki was smoking when he came up with them. But there are some common rules, though there is an exception to every one of them. Stands cannot be seen by non-stand users, their power and range are inversely proportional unless they act automatically, and if the user loses consciousness, the stand and its effects disappear, until the user activates the power again. Also, yes, all the early stands are named after tarot cards, but before you go accusing Araki of plagiarism, this series came before Persona. You'll see this more as we get further into the series, but JoJo is one of the most influential manga of all time, and not just in the world of internet memes. Though speaking of which, there's another one. And unlike other power systems, even very creative ones like quirks or devil fruits, stands depend the least on brute force. Yes, Jotaro's stand punches very hard, but fights between stands aren't decided by who's stronger most of the time. The vast majority of enemies' stands can evade Jotaro's punches by being faster, longer range, or circumventing the need for direct harm entirely by disabling the attacker. Literally the first stand user that attacks the Crusaders after they set out is a stand that is faster than Star Platinum and has to be defeated by Kakuin, who was easily defeated by Jotaro 2 episodes ago. This set up for me that stand battles are more about punch and counter-punch. One stand might be a better counter for a particular ability than another. But even then, the possible effects of stands are extremely broad. Star Platinum's speed and strength may prove useless against certain opponents, but even then, there are creative solutions Jotaro can come up with to solve the problem, like throwing objects to make up for his short range, using the environment to his advantage, exploiting a weakness in the enemy stand, or finding a way to deprive the user of oxygen which they need to remain conscious, which they need to do in order to control their stand. The stands in Stardust Crusaders are already very unique compared to most shonen power systems, and they only get weirder as the story goes along. For the most part, it's fantastic, rewarding versatility, making each fight totally different from the next, and making what specifically each enemy can do a mystery that the Crusaders have to solve before they can properly fight back. But there are some problems with how they are portrayed in this part. For one thing, Jotaro solves most of the problems the creators face, and occasionally he develops a new ability that he only uses a few times, or even just one time. This does kind of put a dampener on the praise I just gave the system, and that's not even counting the other issue. Araki is very good at making antagonists. Even minor antagonists seem invincible, and most of the time he comes up with a brilliant solution for how the heroes defeat them. But sometimes he makes them so invincible that even he can't come up with a solution the heroes can use, and he has to make up a completely new solution out of nowhere. This is especially a problem with the final villains of each part, where he often has to give the heroes an ability that counters the villain's power just because. a problem that persists even to the latest parts. But even then, he's a skilled enough writer to still make the ending satisfying. Overall, the new power system is super solid, and even to this day, one of the best power systems in anime. And the characters who use those powers are inextricably tied to him. Each of the villains are very distinct in terms of personality, design, and their stand powers to the point where I can remember even several minor antagonists. The villains may seem simple on the surface, but all of them are characterized in such a way that contradicts what their tarot cards are supposed to stand for. And those are just the villains. The heroes are just as well characterized, also contrasting the villains by following what their tarot cards stand for. Hirohiko Araki is my favorite mangaka in terms of character art, and it's easy to see why. But in terms of writing, the supporting characters for this part are a bit underwhelming. Joseph is fun and has his previous characterization and his relationship with his family. And pretty early in the story, the Crusaders find a new ally, Jean-Pierre Polnareff, who after getting a vampire flesh bud removed just like Kakyoin, joined them, and he's pretty well fleshed out. He starts off just wanting revenge against the stand user that killed his sister, but after he sees the damage his mistakes cause, he starts fighting to rid the world of Dio's evil. It's a pretty good character arc. He arguably grows more from this journey than Jotaro. But then there's Avdol and Kakyoin, who are very underwritten. Not as underwritten as a lot of the side characters in parts 1 and 2, but still way less than the other Crusaders and even some minor antagonists. A problem that affects even the latest ally that the Crusaders get, who I'll keep secret for spoiler reasons. Kind of a symptom of Jotaro solving too many of the hero's problems. Something that was also an issue in Battle Tendency just with Joseph. It's a problem Araki wouldn't solve for a couple more parts, but it is something he improved upon. Again, author evolution. But even then, I'd hesitate to say that I'd want them removed from the story. They still have some important scenes, especially in Polnareff's arc. And even then, the story structure of Stardust Crusaders makes up for that. The story structure of this part is by far the most villain of the week. Or 2 weeks, since most of them take 2 episodes to beat. Each one is an encounter where the Crusaders come to some new location, something bizarre starts happening, then the stand user begins their attack and puts the Crusaders on the defensive, then the Crusaders figure out a way to fight back and eventually win the battle. There is some variance in that. Sometimes they are trying to take a rest, and sometimes they are trying a new method to get closer to Dio. But Stardust Crusaders is easily the most episodic of all the JoJo parts. Each encounter is set in a completely different location with a completely different antagonist to keep things interesting, but it can get a bit tedious just watching one stand fight after another with no obvious progress made. Stardust Crusaders is the longest part that has been fully animated at this point, at 48 episodes compared to the now standard 39 episodes for parts 4, 5, and 6. But it's the only one that really feels tired at any point. But that moment of exhaustion is very brief. At least it is for me. Maybe take a bit of a break between the two halves of the story during your initial watch or read-through. But, coming on back to the positives, this part has arguably the best final battle in the entire series. It's against Vampire Dio with an incredibly powerful stand. One that takes the entire crew just to figure out and fight against, and when it finally comes down to Jotaro versus Dio, it is a blast. You've probably seen all the memes just as I did before watching the part. And hey look, there's the meme that introduced me to JoJo. It really is worth pushing through a slow ride here. Stardust Crusaders is a journey unlike any other. It may not be the best part of JoJo, but it is a damn good one. Stands revolutionized the fights in this series and many others. Jotaro is an icon of shonen manga, and many of the ideas introduced here are revisited in later parts. And it all comes together as a journey you will never forget. If you like this video and you want to support what I do here, I'd very much appreciate it if you would consider joining my channel membership for rewards such as priority reply and member shoutouts. I'm currently unemployed, so any financial support you can give me is much appreciated. I'm also trying to enable ad revenue in this channel, so if you could do all the things YouTubers ask their fans to do, including sharing and hyping this video, I would very much appreciate it. So I've been positive in this series thus far, but I've also been clear about issues each part has. While that's still true with part 4, Diamond Does Unbreakable is the first part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that is truly great. The first 3 are very good and very influential, but part 4 is when Araki truly figured out the kind of story he wanted to tell, when he perfected the JoJo formula. But don't take that as me saying there is a drop in creativity at all. Far from it. If anything, it's the opposite. The only caveat to that is Araki figured out the formula while he was in the middle of writing Part 4, and you can even see the art style radically change by the end. Diamond is Unbreakable may seem like a step down from Stardust Crusaders at first, in that it's not a big adventure to save the world like the first 3 parts are. Even Phantom Blood builds up how dangerous Dio could become if he's left unchecked. But Diamond is Unbreakable is the first part where the scale is as small as just one town. That being Morio, an entirely fictional town in Japan, and when the protagonist doesn't look like a walking brick of muscle in the anime, and towards the end of the manga. Told you the art style changed. We start off with this guy, Josuke Higashikata, who, yes, doesn't have Joe in his last name, but it turns out that he's Joseph's secret son. Apparently Joseph had an affair with a Japanese woman and never knew that a son came as a result. And because Josuke was alive during the events of Stardust Crusaders, albeit much younger, he has a stand. Crazy Diamond, which, yes, has a simple cut and paste of Star Platinum speed and strength, but its primary ability is to heal and fix things. Any object that was broken into parts can be instantly repaired by Crazy Diamond. The only exception is Josuke himself. Also, he cannot bring people back to life. Plenty of stands can repair a body, but there's nothing that can be done if the soul has already left the body. Josuke is also far more polite and kind than Jotaro or even his dad. He'll heal people who were against him just a moment ago if they aren't all that bad. But he is still a teenager, and if you insult his hair, he goes berserk. Jotaro's back and is now a marine biologist, and technically Josuke's nephew despite being much older than him. Yeah, this is where the Joestar family tree starts getting weird. He's mainly here as a mentor, though he does get some good moments here and there. Minor spoiler warning for the early story arcs. Koichi Hirose and Okuyasu Nijimura are both Josuke's school friends who got pulled into the plot. You see, Keicho Nijimura, Okuyasu's brother, found out that due to a deal their father made with Dio, he now cannot die and is doomed to a miserable existence as this green monster thing. So he's been going around shooting people with this arrow, once owned by a character from Part 3, that can grant people stands in hopes of creating a stand that can kill their father. But if the arrow doesn't work, it just kills you. This ended up creating a lot of enemy stands all over the town of Morio, but was unable to create a stand that could kill their father. Now he's just with Josuke since he did his best to help. Koichi gained a stand after being struck with the arrow, but he doesn't learn how to control it properly until one of the enemy stand users came by to threaten his family. And they are just the first 2 side characters. Diamond is Unbreakable has a much bigger cast of recurring supporting characters. And all of them are far better characterized than Avdol and Kakyoin, and are much closer to Polnareff's level of character development. In fact, some are even more well-developed than him. And many of them are fan favorites, and the stands that they use only get more bizarre. And this part is also the first one where Araki finally started using music references for all the stands, and when he clearly started smoking something when he was coming up with all the stand powers. In the past, we got shooting rocks and unraveling to guy with sword to possessing mirrors, among other things. This time we've got manifesting sound effects, or erasing physical space, or creating an army of little soldiers, and the powers only get weirder. Not only that, but they also get a lot more indirect. Some of them are still direct, but most of them aren't. Instead of straight up killing people in increasingly creative ways, they just trap or control people in increasingly creative ways. Or even if they do enact physical harm to people, it's very conditional. Stands were already a creative and fascinating power system, but with each subsequent part it approaches the singularity of a power system that doesn't depend at all on physical strength. And this part is the catalyst for that change. Remember how I said that Araki perfected the JoJo formula in the middle of this part? Well, that brings me to the only major problem with Diamond is Unbreakable: the story structure in the early arcs. You see, there isn't really a major antagonist for this part in the early arcs, like the first 3 parts had. The events with the Nijimura brothers did lead to a villain who fights against the heroes for a while, but that is gotten over with relatively quickly. Then it's just disconnected encounters with people who got stands from the arrow until the major antagonist is revealed, having very little to do with the prior plot. Because of that, Part 4 can feel a bit directionless in the beginning. Thankfully, each encounter is still very good, with the new level of creativity I'd come to expect from stand battles in this series. But once we get to that major antagonist, it is beyond worth it. I won't give too much away, but the villain of Diamond is Unbreakable, Yoshikage Kira, is not just my favorite villain in the series, he's my favorite villain in anime, period. He is the complete antithesis to Josuke. Where Josuke embraces connection with others, even when they try to kill him, Kira rejects any kind of relationship. Where Josuke strives to build people up and heal them as best he can, even finding ways to subdue villains when he defeats them, Kira will destroy any loose ends and he doesn't care how many people he kills in the process. Josuke may be a dumb teenager, but he's a good boy, and I'll level with you, Kira legitimately unnerves me whenever he's on screen, more so than almost any other villain in anime, and that's because of what he represents. Yoshikage Kira represents the casual, indifferent cruelty ordinary people are capable of, to me at least. Even people who seem perfectly normal, even those who from all outward appearances are kind and compassionate, can still be capable of horrific, cruel evil. Something that is entirely too real, especially now. But even for the worst of the worst, no matter how cruel, no matter how powerful, even with control over time itself, they cannot escape justice. The final arc of this part is some of the most intense nail-biting back and forth between our heroes and the villain I've ever seen. Not just in anime, but in fiction as a whole. More so than any other JoJo part, aside from one, arguably. It had me on the edge of my seat wondering how the hell the heroes were supposed to come out on top. But, unlike the final battle in Part 3 where Araki had to add a solution that many fans argue to this day came out of nowhere, the way Kira is defeated makes complete sense. Not only that, but it manages to be one of the most poetic ends to a villain in the entire series. Because at the end of the day, this crazy diamond is unbreakable. Part 4 is, to this very day, one of the most universally beloved parts of JoJo. Not all of it is well crafted, but the parts that are really hit. The characters are developed, the villain is phenomenal, the power system has evolved, and the climax is just incredible. In fact, because of how great it is and how disconnected it is, I might recommend DIU for anyone who wants to get into JoJo, but bounced off Part 1. But I'll get to that more later. For now, it's time for Koichi and us to take a trip to Italy. Part 5, Golden Wind, is a bit of an outlier among the parts of JoJo, in that it's the most disconnected from the main story of the Joestars vs. Dio. It's set in Italy, which isn't the biggest jump considering that we've already been from Britain to America to Japan, Egypt, and everywhere in between. The real curveball is the protagonist, Giorno Giovanna, who is Dio's son. He even acts like Dio from time to time, saying muda muda and being ruthless in a fight. But because Dio was using Jonathan's body when Giorno was conceived, he is also a Joestar, so he inherited Jonathan's nobility. If he can tell someone is a good person, he'll be merciful. He only unleashes that ruthless side against those that he judges as deserving of it. Oh, and his childhood was genuinely horrifying. He was abused and bullied by basically everyone around him, especially his stepfather, until he saved the life of a man he did not realize was a gangster from the Mafia, who used his position to prevent all of the abuse Giorno was suffering. The gangster who saved him was willing to kill a man with a family, but there was a sense of honor to him, as it was because the man was selling drugs to children, thus forming Giorno's philosophy of life. With him being willing to kill in the name of justice, him seeing the Mafia as an organization that promotes order and helps protect people, and forming his goal, to become a gang star, rising through the ranks of the criminal organization. And he's helped in this endeavor by his stand, Gold Experience, which has the power to give life to inanimate objects, turning them into plants or animals for a variety of effects. Later he learns how to turn objects into body parts which can heal wounds. It's not instantaneous like Crazy Diamond, but it works. The part technically starts with Koichi from Part 4 arriving in Italy, able to speak the native language thanks to Heaven's Door, a stand held by in-universe manga artist Rohan Hishibe. Man, that stand is OP. And it turns out he was sent there by Jotaro to try and get a read on Giorno, testing if he could ever become a threat to the world just like his father. But despite the occasional act of theft, Koichi comes to the conclusion that Giorno is a good person, unlikely to ever become a tyrant, and the two are able to part on good terms. But that's only to ease the audience into the new status quo, in much the same way that Jotaro did in Part 4. But the important part is who else Giorno meets in this opening arc. Bruno Bucciarati, a man much higher ranked in Passione, the mafia organization Giorno wants to join. Equipped with Sticky Fingers, a stand that has the power to create zippers on any surface, allowing him to break any object into pieces, walk right through them, or even get inside them. At first, Bruno is antagonistic towards Giorno, but then Giorno notices Bruno also has a righteous heart when he feels guilt over seeing evidence of drug abuse in the bystanders. So after getting the better of him, Giorno makes Bruno a proposal to help him on his quest to revolutionize the Mafia under his honorable dream, to which Bruno accepts, and he takes the newcomer to meet his team, all of whom are stand users. Leone Abbacchio, who used to work as a cop, but he hated the corruption in the system and lost his partner due to a bribe he took. He's older and more cynical than the other members, and he doesn't really like Giorno, considering him a new kid who's strutting around like he owns the place and somehow got Bruno on his side. But there is usually a way in which their goals align, and they find common ground. His stand is Moody Blues, which has the power to replay past events by taking the appearance of a person and performing their actions in the past. Guido Mista, who was living a normal life until he saved a woman who was being assaulted and shot her attacker. He was sentenced to prison until Bruno saw potential in him and used Passione's influence to break him out. Also, he gets along the best with Giorno from the get-go, but he's also got a serious, or silly, fear. The number 4. He firmly believes that interacting with anything having to do with the number will bring misfortune. His stand is Sex Pistols, 6 tiny human-ish beings that banter and can ride on his bullets and kick them to redirect them and add more force to Mista's shots. They can even operate independently of Mista based on any orders he gives them. Narancia Girga, who lost his mother to an eye infection and his father neglected him as a result. He tried to make friends, but someone he thought he could trust framed him for beating an old woman and Narancia was sent to prison. He also almost died of an eye infection like his mom until Bruno saved his life. His stand, Aerosmith, is a mini fighter plane equipped with machine guns and a bomb, along with a radar that can pick up on emissions of CO2. And finally, Panakata Fugo, the son of a rich family who was assaulted by a professor at a university, to which he retaliated brutally, only to get convicted. His family managed to have him released, but then they disowned him. He was forced to commit petty crime to survive until Bruno gave him a new opportunity. Partially thanks to his past, Fugo is very angry, one of the angriest characters in all of JoJo, and his rage being unleashed is not a pretty sight. Case in point, his stand. Purple Haze, a very strong stand that can release a flesh-eating virus from capsules on its fists that can give any living thing an extraordinarily painful death. You may notice that, like Giorno, they all suffered from an awful childhood and could have led very tragic lives if it had not been for one gangster showing them some kindness, allowing them to do some good with their lives despite being cast out. It's quite a brutal way to put a cast of heroes together, but it also makes Bruno's team one of the best characterized teams of heroes in the entire series. And as you may have surmised, it's also the gayest out of all of them, with all of the members having wacky outfits that all have open chests. And that's not even considering their mannerisms. Many headcanon Bruno and Abbacchio as being a couple, and I can definitely see that. Golden Wind is one of the first things I think of when it comes to gay-coded characters in anime. And Bruno's team is contrasted against a similarly well-characterized team of villains. Pretty early in the series, Bruno and friends are introduced to Trish, who happens to be the daughter of the mysterious quote-unquote boss of Passione. Trish is a character who gets a lot more time later, and I won't spoil any of that, but I will say that her arc of claiming agency in her own life is very powerful, despite the fact that she doesn't get as much action as the other heroes later on. But what's important right now is that there's a team of men who defected from Passione, and 2 of their members were killed in an extremely gruesome fashion. But when they get wind of the existence of a daughter of the boss, they set out to take her and use her to get to him. They actually have a good group dynamic, but they lack the honor that Bruno's group does, and as such they are willing to kidnap Trish, who is by all means an innocent girl that just happens to be the daughter of a mafia boss she has never even met. And they're also willing to kill tons of innocent bystanders in pursuit of this goal. But they are more well fleshed out and sympathetic than most minor antagonists. They even have relationships with one another, thus leading to one of the more unique battle concepts in the series, taking on 2-person teams of stand users working in tandem. And then there are the new stands. In case it wasn't obvious, Araki went to a whole new level of creatively weird with this part, with all of the stands being far more unconventional, In fact, some of them aren't even overtly destructive. Even Giorno's stand is physically weak compared to every other protagonist's stand I'll go over in this video. It's one of the only times Araki didn't just cut and paste Star Platinum's moveset, so the characters have to get creative. Even those who do have stands that do direct physical harm to their enemies need to work around conditions of how stands work in order to achieve victory, giving Part 5 some of the most dynamic yet fair stand battles in the entire series. And then we have the boss, who, as you may have guessed, is the main antagonist of this part, though I won't spoil his identity here. He is not the most original in terms of characterization, as his reclusive lifestyle away from anyone who may threaten him reminds me a bit too much of Kira in Part 4. But he is still a compelling adversary for the heroes to go up against. But due to a lot of the memes I keep seeing, I feel the need to address something. Minor spoiler warning for about halfway through the part. I'm going to reveal how the boss's stand works. It's revealed that the boss's stand is King Crimson, which has the power to quote-unquote erase time. This is a widely misunderstood and joked about ability in the fandom, so I'm going to do my best to explain it here. I've seen some people say that King Crimson is like the hand from Part 4 but with time, which is a comparison I agree with. But personally, I like to think of King Crimson as being like cutting clips of audio or video when editing. For those who have never edited video or audio before, that's the process of removing mistakes or unwanted parts of the clip in the final product. I often have to say a sentence multiple times in the recording process because I keep messing it up, and then I go back and cut out the mistakes. Sometimes I even say, King Crimson! When I do, just for funsies. Moving on to the final battle against this enemy, it's pretty intense, though not as much as the final encounters with Dio or Kira. Despite it being a rather infamous instance of Araki making the antagonist a little too invincible, it still feels earned because of the sheer amount of trouble Giorno and friends went through to get there, and to find the means to defeat the boss. Overall, Golden Wind is easily one of the best constructed parts in all of JoJo. Araki had perfected the formula by this point, so it doesn't have the awkward transitional period in the middle like Part 4. Very different protagonist, well fleshed out characters on both sides, and an impactful bittersweet resolution to one of the most dramatic tales in the entire series. On a technical level, I'd say it's the best part in the original universe before the series got rebooted with Steel Ball Run. But that doesn't make it my favorite part, because that honor goes to Part 6, Stone Ocean. One of the best experiences I've ever had in anime. It's what elevated JoJo to where it is in my top 5 favorite anime of all time. It's thus far the only part of JoJo that actually managed to make me cry. And exactly how Araki manages that starts with the protagonist. Back when Stone Ocean was being written, it was pretty rare to see a female protagonist of any shonen series. Even today, the only leading ladies in shonen I can think of are Jolyne Kujo and Maka Albarn. So Araki got some pushback from editors who questioned him when he said he wanted to have a woman as the new JoJo. But he stood his ground, and we got one of the most badass JoJos in the series as a result. She gets put through the ringer more so than arguably any other JoJo, being met with the worst circumstances and still managing to get back up and aura another villain. Because yes, much like Giorno and his Muda Muda, Jolyne inherited her father's stand rush. Unlike Giorno, who at least was lifted out of his terrible place in life before the beginning of his story, Jolyne is at her lowest point when Part 6 begins and has to climb her way out. And shortly after getting thrown in Green Dolphin Street Prison for a crime she did not commit, Jolyne awakens her stand. Stone Free. Which, yes, is another strong, fast punching stand like Crazy Diamond and Star Platinum, but instead of healing things, it has the ability to unravel Jolyne's entire body into string that has a huge range and can do basically anything a string can do. On top of allowing Jolyne to listen in on distant conversations because why not? That isn't even the most nonsensical use of stand-based wiretapping in this part. Using this new ability, Jolyne quickly becomes acquainted with how things work in Green Dolphin Street Prison, and she quickly figures out that someone framed her, and that she isn't the only prisoner to obtain a stand. After a few scuffles, Jotaro shows up to talk, and Jolyne is not happy to see him. Apparently he's been very distant her whole life, and she and her mom have always resented him for this. If you're familiar with the series, you could assume that he just wanted to stay away from Jolyne to avoid bringing her into stand battles, and the ongoing feud between the Joestars and Dio. Yes, despite getting aura'd 3 parts ago, Dio's evil still remains. This is another way that Part 6 is different from the previous 2 parts. Diamond is Unbreakable and Golden Wind are definitely great follow-ups to the events of parts 1 to 3, but as far as the story of Joestars vs. Dio go, they are effectively spin-offs. Part 6 is the direct continuation of that conflict right where Part 3 left off. Jolyne and Jotaro quickly figure out that something isn't right. They fight their way through an illusion partially thanks to some help Jolyne received prior to entering the meeting room, and they actually seem to get a bit of bonding time, but the moment doesn't last long. When an enemy shows up and seemingly takes something from Jotaro that leaves his body and mind failing. But with his final moments before falling into a coma, he tells Jolyne that he's always cared about her. So Jolyne gets her father to an escape route, and she goes back into the prison to retrieve something that was stolen from him. And in the process, she proves herself to be far more of a nuisance to the villain than he ever anticipated. And that is how Part 6 is set up. A villain connected to Dio hiding in the shadows, and Jolyne going up against a prison filled with secrets and stand abilities designed to stop her from thwarting his evil plan. Fortunately, she quickly gains some new allies to help with all of this. The first of those turns out to be the strange boy who gave her the bone that woke her up from the illusion, Emporio. He was apparently born in prison and has never seen the outside world. He's able to stay in the women's ward in secret thanks to his stand, burning down the house, which can make ghost copies of any object in Emporio's vicinity that was destroyed, including entire rooms destroyed in a fire that Emporio can just live in. He manages to be a tag-along kid that isn't annoying, and he actually contributes in some really meaningful ways. Second off is the part's main supporting character, Hermes Costello. She is very well clicked into how things work in the prison, and she and Jolyne become fast friends, especially after Hermes gains a stand and proceeds to get tied up in the battle between the Joestars and Dio. That stand being Kiss, which is pretty strong but primarily uses its ability to duplicate any object, including body parts, by placing a sticker on them. And if that sticker is removed, the two objects fly back together, with a bit of damage being taken. Sounds simple and maybe even unimpressive on the surface, but there are a lot of creative uses for the various aspects of this ability. Finally, rounding out the main trio, we have one of the weirdest concepts for a supporting character I've ever seen. Foo Fighters. Originally a plankton stand that was given sentience by the villain in order to protect a stash of important discs. But after being defeated by the heroes, Jolyne decides to show her some mercy and even kindness. So she possesses the corpse of one of the killed prisoners and decides to follow Jolyne to repay her. Foo Fighters can shoot pieces of plankton out like bullets, regenerate from any source of water, and use her plankton to replace destroyed tissue in the human body, thus making her the designated healer of this part. Next introduced is Weather Report, yes that's his name, who has a stand also called Weather Report which can control the weather, including in some really wild ways. His memory was lost a long time ago and he's now dedicated to getting it back. And he has the sense to help Jolyne, believing that it will help him recover his memories eventually. Finally, we have a man named Anasui. When he saw his girlfriend was cheating on him, he didn't respond well. Emporio actually seems afraid of him, unless Weather Report is there to rein him in. Despite that, he develops a crush on Jolyne due to her tenacity and ferocity. It's a bit creepy at times, but he does mean well. And he has my favorite stand in the entire series, and easily the one I would want to have. Diver Down, which has the power to dive into and restructure objects, including the human body. This stand has some very cool and kind of disturbing applications that I will leave you to discover on your own. Bit of a different main cast this time around, but similar to Part 5, all of them have suffered tragedy. Unlike Part 5, there was no one to pull them out of it. They had to figure it out by themselves. Tragedy in life just happens. Unfortunate circumstances that were often decided before you were born due to choices made by family members or those around them. But there's no point in wallowing in self-pity. No matter how bad things get, you can always light a fire in your heart and forge a path forward. A realization that, I won't lie, has helped me a lot in my own life. But this time the setting of the part presents some obstacles. We've had characters in this series who go to prison from time to time. Most of the squad from Part 5 was at least threatened with jail time, and Jotaro starts his bizarre adventure off in prison. Like father, like daughter. But here the setting itself adds an element of challenge. Jolyne is under constant watch by prison guards, and runs the risk of being reprimanded should she try to do anything visibly rebellious. Sure, most of the guards aren't stand users and therefore can't see Stone free or any of the enemy stands, but they can certainly see Jolyne going somewhere she isn't supposed to or knocking out a guard. And when a guard or a prisoner has a stand, that issue becomes much greater. As such, Jolyne has to work within the rules, and on many occasions, bite the bullet if she can't figure out a way to avoid any provable accusations, which leads to a lot of interesting conflicts. Now there is one more character I need to discuss, and that's the villain. Jolyne and co. don't find out who it is for a while, but he's revealed to the audience pretty early on to be Enrico Pucci, the priest of the prison's church. He used to be close with Dio. Very close, if you know what I mean. Yeah, this is how Araki confirms that Dio is bi. And he's an interesting case. He's quite the manipulator, every bit as much as Dio, and when he can't manipulate someone, he has ways of just straight up controlling them, which he can do thanks to his stand, White Snake, which can create illusions, but its primary ability is to remove aspects of things and turn them into discs that can be inserted into other things. This is how he took Star Platinum and Jotaro's memory from him at the beginning of the part. Jolyne only ever got involved because it was the best way he could think of to get around Star Platinum's power. And he serves as quite the intelligent and capable antagonist to go up against. There are times when he seems just as tenacious as the heroes, but in truth, he isn't. Like many of the villains in this series, he's one who would rather avoid problems than confront them head-on, who has no respect for those around him, seeing them only as a means to an end. He's not unlike the boss from Part 5 in a few ways. Speaking of which, I can't fully explain my thoughts on Part 6 without spoiling the ending drastically. So, huge spoiler warning. Not just for Part 6, but for all of the previous parts. Skip to the timecode on screen if you want to avoid that. Okay, so at the end of Stone Ocean, we finally see Pucci's plan, and by extension, Dio's vision, come to fruition. Pucci's stand transforms into Made in Heaven, one of the most powerful stands in the entire series. It has the ability to accelerate time across the entire universe, but the user can choose to only accelerate time on specific objects or people. With this, Pucci is able to kill almost all of the heroes. Jotaro even dies with his head being split open, just as a prophetic stand all the way back in Part 3 once predicted. Only Emporio is able to escape, thanks to a nearby dolphin and some quick thinking on Jolyne's part, as well as figuring out the one weakness Made in Heaven has, the fact that its user is still human. The next thing Emporio knows, he's back in the prison, only it's not the same. Jotaro and Jolyne are there, but they aren't the same. And then Pucci reappears to explain. Jolyne and her friends are dead. He left them behind in the previous version of the universe. He accelerated time to literally the end of time, which reset the universe and put everyone back, just remembering their previous lives, so they know what fate is to come for them. And only Pucci can alter fate in this universe. Pucci was so distraught by the tragedy in his own life that he decided to make sure everyone knows what will happen to them and will carry out their fate without any pain. Much like Diavolo, he's obsessed with the end result, not caring about growth or change. He wants to avoid the pain that naturally comes with living. Not just that, but force it on every other living being. But even then, all hope is not lost. Pucci doesn't use the time acceleration at first because he doesn't want Emporio escaping him again and becoming an imperfection in his world until he completes the loop back to the time he started the acceleration. Emporio manages to trick Pucci into inserting a disc into him that contains an aspect of Weather Report, a disc that Jolyne gave him for safekeeping, thus granting Emporio the ability to use it. Pucci reactivates Made in Heaven and prepares to kill Emporio after increasing his speed a bit. But then his body stops, and so does his stand. Emporio used Weather Report, a stand Pucci was always afraid of, to flood the room with oxygen, specifically O3 usually found in the ozone layer, which is toxic to humans. Because Pucci was moving in accelerated time, he was also breathing it faster, and was thus quickly incapacitated. Without the focus needed to control it, Made in Heaven is completely useless, no matter how powerful it is. In the anime, Jolyne's theme plays in the background here, because even though she may have died, Emporio still carries her will with him, just like every Joestar does with their fallen friends. And with that, Emporio is finally able to kill Pucci. This undoes the time acceleration completely, putting the universe back the way it was. The only difference is that Pucci no longer exists, or more accurately, he never existed in this timeline. And Emporio meets people who look and act a lot like his friends, but their names are all different. Most notably, Jolyne is now named Irene. She isn't a JoJo, because that name is given to those who are destined to fight evil, and the evil she was destined to fight doesn't exist here. Yet she was able to meet all of her friends, because fate in this series works like gravity between people, which causes them to meet. Without Pucci to send any of them to prison, none of them needed to go in order to meet. Despite the change, fate plays out in a similar way in this alternate timeline. That's an idea I haven't seen explored in any other piece of media. Well, aside from one, but that's a story for another day. Irene takes a liking to Emporio, inviting him along with her. They leave as rain starts to fall, possibly due to Emporio still having Weather Report's disc in him. This universe's Weather Report, the guy not the stand, is also nearby, thus bringing JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 6, Stone Ocean, and by extension the original series, to a close. I hope it's clear why this ending made me cry now. The final arc is an expression of one common theme that is presented throughout the part, that being the theme of legacy. Dio's legacy continued to trouble the Joestars through Pucci, just as Jonathan's legacy continued to resist him through his descendants and their companions, even long after Jonathan Joestar died. Araki has stated that Irene may lack Jolyne's memories, but she does have her love, meaning that unlike Pucci and by extension Dio, Jolyne's legacy and by extension Jonathan's is preserved. Every JoJo villain faced an ironic fate befitting of their wrongdoings. Dio thought himself invincible and had no care for the damage he caused. In fact, he delighted in cruelty, so he was defeated by a man defending someone he loved. Twice. In one encounter he was straight up outplayed, and in the other he was overpowered. Kars wanted to become an unkillable being, and he did, only to end up wanting to die but being unable to do so. Kira wanted to live a quiet life away from any real consequence for the lives that he destroyed, only for him to end up exposed for all his crimes in very standout fashion and being dragged to hell, courtesy of one of his victims, by an unstoppable horde of demon hands after a lifetime of killing women for their hands. Diavolo thought he could escape fate and always arrive at a result benefiting him without having to bother with the work of getting there, only to end up unable to reach the result, that is death, and having to suffer the pain of death which he spent his whole life avoiding over and over. And Pucci? He wanted to make all of humanity stuck in a timeline shaped to his whim, because he wanted all of humanity to avoid the pain of tragic fates, only to end up without any impact on the universe whatsoever, thanks to those who embrace the pain of their tragic pasts and their uncertain futures. My experience with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure definitely was bizarre. Even without all the weirdness in the story itself, I went in feeling nothing for it, to it being in my top 5 favorite anime or manga. And the more I've engaged with it, even creating this video, the more it has impacted me in a very deep level, and thus the more I've come to appreciate it. And the more it has bothered me when I see people judging it just from that bizarre off-putting exterior as I once did. But if you think you can handle the bizarre nature of this story, it's an adventure I cannot recommend enough. But for everyone else who is off-put by that first part as I was, I'm going to recommend an alternative watching or reading order. Jeff from Mother's Basement already kind of did this, but as I explained in a previous video, I don't like the basement order. It makes enough sense to me, but honestly I wouldn't recommend it for a new fan, because it's complicated. So I'm going to recommend what I call the Mythos order, which I've updated a bit since the last video where I discussed it. You start with Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, then you watch or read the rest of the parts in order. Part 4 is the most disconnected from the other parts. It's the first truly great part, and it shows what makes JoJo as a whole so beloved. If what I've said intrigues you and you'd like to try JoJo out this way, please let me know how that goes. For now, that's all for me. If you like this video, I've got a lot more where that came from, about other anime, more general LGBT topics, and a lot more. I'm Kylan Mythos, and I'll see you all next time.